Welcome everyone to another Spot On chat. I'm Rebecca Monet with Zorakle Profiles. We provide profiling tools to franchisors and to franchise brokers that help facilitate a right fit between a prospective franchisee and a franchisor. So today I have with me my dear friend Gerry Henley. He's a coach and an EOS implementer with Launch to Grow. He's also an advisory board member with the Titus Center for Franchising. So welcome, Gerry. I'm so glad to have you here today.
It's great to be here. Nice to see you.
So, we've had numerous conversations in the 10 years that I've known you, all the way back to Kitchen Solvers days. And the one thing that you keep coming back to that I wanted to share with our folks was this idea that there is a difference between unit level economics, which is typically what a franchisor is measuring, and unit level success. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's a pretty bold statement that I made, and I actually had that at my booth at IFA, and I said, "Ask me about the difference," and everybody said, "Well, what the heck is the difference?" And whatever you call it, it could be just terminology, but I think unit level economics, as everybody uses that, to me, is simply a measurement of what's happening. So that's the KPIs I look at. That's the benchmarking. That's everything else. It doesn't show you what you're doing to achieve that. And so unit level success is just a terminology that I came up with to focus on. And it revolves around, okay, everybody talks about unit level performance as well. How's their unit level performance is. And typically we look at an FDD, we have average unit volume. Well, the average unit volume is skewed because the top performers skewing that data very much. So I just look at it as unit level success, but establishing a benchmark for that. So if I'm going to talk about unit level success, I establish a benchmark that is in sales and profitability at the 12-month mark of operations. So from the time they begin operations, if you're a brick and mortar, over time you have grand opening, from the service base, home base, from the time they sign the franchise agreement. But 12 months of operations, what is that unit level of success benchmark in a system that says, okay, if they execute to our business model, if we're presenting it right, training well to it, and they do everything that we ask of them, which is what some of the challenges are, but they do everything that we ask of them to our business model, at 12 months, they should be achieving this certain pace. And that's going to be system specific, of course. But I will tell you that the vast majority of systems that I ask in my journey here with this is they don't really have that defined. So really what we're doing is measuring with unit level economics what's happening in the system. We're not measuring to what should be happening and what do we hold ourselves accountable to.
So basically the idea with unit level economics is how ultimately measuring how successful the ZOR is, the franchisor is, where the benchmarks that are being set that we want our franchisees to hit, more that unit level success markers, is how we measure the success of the franchisee. Are they measuring up to certain benchmarks or markers?
Yes, to that benchmark of sales and profitability. Again, we present it well, we train well to it, we have all the support, and that franchisee does what we ask them to do. They should be hitting this benchmark of success. Perhaps let me take it another step further to kind of anchor this.
Yeah.
So when I work with systems, and I just took on a new client that we did, and they didn't have that established, we established that. And I say, okay, so now let me talk to you about the unit level success ratio, which I know this sounds really simple and everything else, but it's just a different way to look at it. Is I say, okay, let's say that that's $20,000 a month. Okay, assuming a certain profitability achievement. And okay, you're saying that. That's great. Now, let's look at your system and see how many of your franchisees that have been in your system for 12 months or more are achieving that. And that, I got to tell you, is where the real eye opener is. I've had some that were okay at it. The worst one I had was less than 5%.
Oh
So in other
my.
words, out of 100 franchises, they have 5 that have been operating over 12 months, hitting that success ratio. One of the averages is 25 to 30%. But before I get there, I typically ask them that same question again. Okay, you got a great business model, you're delivering it well, you're training to it well, you're holding the franchisee accountable to it, you're holding your team accountable to achieving it, and you're holding your team accountable to holding the franchisee accountable to execution. Because in the end, the franchisee is accountable for execution. All right. So what should that ratio be? If you had a brand new franchise and you had 10, how many of them, if you're doing it that way, how many of them should hit that? And anybody that goes between 80 to 100%. Most people say 100%.
Of course.
Right. So I kind of set the hook there, and I say, great. Some of them say 100%. I say, that's not realistic. Some might not make it. Some might do this. Of course, also, we got to make sure we're bringing the right people in with the right fit, that's not a shameless plug there, but it is very, very important. Very strong believer in that. So I say, well, okay, is 75 to 80% acceptable? Well, yeah, that's the way it should be. Well, then if we look at their system and they're only doing 30%,
wow,
that's what we got to measure. So I like the unit level success tied to that benchmark, tied to the unit level success ratio. So if I have that benchmark, I have a new standard of KPIs and a benchmark that I'm going to hold my ops team accountable to. Right? So now they're accountable to achieving that number. The franchisees accountable to achieving their number. Okay, so it will work. And then oftentimes when we do that, we look at, hey, it's easy to draw the line in the sand and say, okay, we'll do this from now on to achieve that number.
Right.
The tougher thing is when we look back and we see we're only 30% in our existing system, okay, but there's real value there. I mean, can you imagine, Rebecca, if you're at 30% and you're saying I could be at 80% if I did it right, what if I start moving that needle? What if I could move it from 30% to 50% with my existing franchise, or 60%? I see a bunch of value in that, because most systems that are struggling with adding the bandwidth they need to get where they need. When I go to ops at conferences a lot, we talk about emerging brands, trying to figure out how to get the staff they need, how to get the benchmarks, that, how do they get this bandwidth? It's got to be that I got to see the numbers. Well, if we were doing 30%, but we could increase that to 50%, I think there's some monetary gains there. There's royalty gains in a heartbeat. And then I can get the CEO, the CFO to see that, and we can say, okay, well, there's money to be found here. And I can invest in these people to achieve that.
I love anything that includes what I call reverse engineering, right? So you've sort of said, this is ideal. We're going to get to 80% success ratio. And here are the KPIs that will let us know that they're moving that direction. And then the reverse engineering of that is, okay, what do we have to do today as franchisors to make sure those KPIs are hit? What do we have to do in terms of training or support or operationally or marketing? And how then do we keep our franchisee accountable and our field support people empowered to keep our franchisees accountable to hit those targets? And I would think a big part of it is simply having that number to start with. This is where we're going.
It's everything.
Right? And
everything.
Like, I guess the question I would have is, you've been working with franchisors for a while, and you've told me some franchisors don't even know what that ratio.
Well, the vast majority of them, I will tell you that well over 80% that I've been tracking so far, of 80% So through IFA, through my journey and everything else, I've probably well north of 50 franchisors that I've asked that question, and the vast majority don't have that number established. And I want to park there just for a second, Rebecca, because when I get prospective clients, we're really struggling with this and getting them there. And to be frank, if you don't have that number, what are you striving to achieve?
Exactly.
So I'm not measuring to that everything starts with, it's the old adage, to start with the end in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we do a lot in EOS, for traction, is we always start with the end in mind, and we just hammer to that. And I think that one of the things that I illustrate to franchisors when I'm talking to them is, too often I see what I call the incidents of training and support.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I got it on Frankenhooker. I got it in my photo. I got it here. It's there. Well, they just don't ever pay attention to it. As this, and I said, well, wait a minute. If we establish number and we look at that, we know it's going to take a year to get there. We need to look at it as a journey of training and support.
Mm-hmm.
We got to look at giving the franchisees what they need when they need it. And too often we're giving them a triple fire hose at 1 week of training or 2 weeks of training and say, now bless you, my son, you are now a franchise, go forth, multiply and be fruitful.
Right.
Okay. But given so I convert that from an incident of training to a journey to the 12 months to achieve that.
Love it. In another conversation, I want to drill more into that, but I want to validate what you were saying. Some years ago, Zorakle, along with FBR, did some research where we looked at the psychographics of a franchisee, and then we looked at various markers within the FBR. And what we saw was just the point that you made, that when the franchisee was given a fire hose approach to training, they didn't retain it. There is a saturation point in that brain. You can only handle so much. And there are so if you're spreading it out over time, if you're training them on whatever, let's say technology or too soon, or you're training them in marketing too soon, or you're training them in areas that are not applicable to that early stage franchisee, it literally is like water off a duck's back, right? So,
yeah, that's very true. So I put it like this. I say, do you want your franchisees leaving training week in a panic saying, holy crap, what I get myself into? Or, wow, I can do this.
I can do this. And that's what you want them to leave with.
Well, and to, not to give all my secrets away, but they're not really secrets, but I changed the training format to how much everybody's typically a rush to get from franchise signing or the franchisee signing the agreement to get them into training.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to elongate that cycle. We need to lengthen that cycle and say, okay, how much can we bring them along at a pace that they can absorb and retain, then bring them into that week of training, whatever you do. But more importantly, then that journey begins of reinforcement, of showing them, telling them, educate them, and then reinforcing. But all along the way, holding them accountable to execution to the business plan. But it's how we do it. And it's a journey. It can't be all at once, one and done and see. And that's what I see a lot.
Yeah. Great advice. Great advice. So it is a journey that's going to build confidence as well as skill sets, but it needs to be pieced out in a organized fashion so a franchisee can execute with whatever it is he or she is currently learning. So Gerry, thank you for spending time with me talking about this difference between unit level economics and of course unit level success, and this success ratio, and how important it is to a franchisor to know exactly kind of what the end in mind is, what that marker is, so there can be some reverse engineering and some ways to implement things. So thank you for being with me, and we'll see you at another Spot On Chat.
All right. Pleasure to be here. Nice to see you.